Okay, well, we'll get started. I think all of you know me. So, Angela Erdman here to present to you the budget hearing for the 24-25 budget season. We'll do the introduction. Okay, so goals of the presentation is to share our primary funding calculating factors as well as our just full budget for the Manitowoc Public School District. So we'll cover revenue limit, our membership, which really drives the revenue limit, the per pupil funding, land values, the preliminary budget, and then other key factors that the MPSD is working on within the budget process. So first, revenue limits. So revenue limits, as we've talked about many times, are our primary source of funding. Controls the revenue that school district can generate between equalization aid and tax levy. And the state formula is based on a 3-year enrollment average, and our budget for this year from the state included an increase of $325 per pupil. So, so our count for third Friday count was at 4,800 for students, and we received $11,035 or $325 per student. So we are still at the low revenue ceiling for districts. So in looking at an overview of enrollment, enrollment is based on 2 primary things, summer school FTE and then our membership count that happens on the third Friday. So we had 75 students for our summer school count this year. That's down 34 from the previous year. And our membership count is down 32 overall. And what they do is because they base this on a 3-year average, so even though we have 4,714 students as a part of the as part of our September FTE, the 3-year average, because the other 3 years were higher, we're funded off of 4,804 students.
Angela, do you want questions as you go along or wait till the end?
If you can wait till the end, that would be great.
Okay. Looking at the summer school and the slides you sent us and the thing, it looks like summer school really went this year for the 24-25 school year significantly lower than we have ever been in the past.
Correct.
Why? What happened?
There was a significant change in programming. So that was the main reason. The program time was shorter and also the number of options was shorter. And you need 48,600 minutes to equal an FTE. So those minutes are counted based on contact and attendance. And so with limited or a smaller amount of options, smaller amount of students participating, that went down significantly.
I get that. Was that a district choice to chop summer school so bad?
Yes, that was just, they have reevaluated the offerings that we had, and then the offerings were more limited for this year compared to previous years. So that impacts our revenue limit this year.
Summer school usually is a big moneymaker.
It is, I agree. And it also impacts our equalization aid as well the following year. So it will impact us one way this year and another way next year. So yeah, nope, 100%. Summer school is critical. So. And I can take questions as we go through here. So as we talked about the 3-year averages for the district, this just shows how that works out. So your count will carry through the counts from the 22-23, 23-24, and 24-25 school year are all averaged together. So so we're down 53 students this year. We were down 43 students the previous year. I'm not going to go over this in great detail, but this really shows just that we're funded at 4,800 students now. And what they do is they take what's called your base year calculation and your current year calculation. And they take the difference between that, and you also get hold harmless funding. So we get $600,000 worth of hold harmless funding just because of our declining enrollment. It's meant to just smooth out the loss of funding due to declining enrollment. So our enrollment trend overall, we've declined 450 students in the last 10 years in our resident count. The resident count includes open enrollment out as well, along with your what we call butts and seats, or the students served present in the school district. So the other thing, and there's another slide that shows us in a little more detail, but if you look at the dollar change, the per pupil funding, just through the revenue limit is $325. But I also wanted to show that The state overall public, the per pupil increases for vouchers were $344 this year, while the public school part was $325. So that we'll come back to that in a little bit later in the presentation. For equalized value, we're up to over $4 billion. That's increased extensively over the last couple of years. You'll see on this slide here too that we've had the last 3 years. The two previous years were over 10%, 16%, 14% increases, and then a 7.27% increase this year. So most of that is all inflationary. When I looked up the municipalities for Manitowoc, it came up to 1.02% increase overall. So, and there's different points in time where it's based off a January 1 value by the Department of Revenue, and that's adjusted as we go through. And so that's what is certified for October 1 for this year. And that equalized value just levels the playing field between districts. That's what the function of it is. It's different than the assessed value, and that often gets confused. And I mentioned on here, 1.7 billion is the amount that it's increased over the last 10 years. So for equalized aid, the fundamental purpose of it is between the land value and the aid is to level the playing field across all of the districts. And so it's includes shared cost membership and the equalized property value. So to Keith's point that he mentioned with the membership for summer school, for example, our summer school counts from last year are what feed our equalization aid this year. So our aid history, this is our counts, and the equalization aid, I want to also share that includes voucher counts. And so that increases the amount of membership that's within your aid calculation. So there has been some talk at the state level about decoupling vouchers from the public schools through the revenue limit. And you know, the real critical thing to remember with that is we're aided on it. So, you know, we would lose a little more aid than we actually receive as opposed to the expense that we have for vouchers. These are the factors or the amounts that we have in the equalization aid estimate for membership count for this year. Just looking historically at where we were, the last time our membership counts were around this same point were the 90s, early 90s and the late 80s, if you would take out the voucher students. So that's just kind of a historical kind of point to make regarding the membership counts. Okay, so the levy estimate. So you take our equalization aid that's calculated, and that's $42 million for this budget year, and that ends up being 60% of the total revenue limit compared to the estimated preliminary levy of $27 million. So that just shows what our levy and our aid distribution were in the last 2 years, or this year and the previous year. This is just a summary of the revenue limit, and it shows that what was graphically shown on the slide before. So the tax levy history, state average, what we put in here, we don't know what the state average is. So $7.18 was the average last year, and we landed at $6.65. And the levy is estimated to be at $6.83. One of the major factors with the levy that we cannot predict is the amount of vouchers. And so that's really passed through. That's what would have the largest impact at this point. So for the budget, this goes over the general funds. This talks about just the overall budget itself. Currently, and we'll have the final budget for approval at it's a special meeting for October. But currently where we stand, we're at a deficit of $324,000 with the general fund. And so we've worked overall, that deficit was more, and then we've worked to bring that down, and we'll have some final adjustments for final approval. That also includes, there's about $119,000 for Get Kids Ahead, and then $13,000 for common school funds. So that's also within that deficit. The true deficit is less those amounts. The expenditure highlights, we had the CPI increases with steps for staff. We had a 3.5% transportation increase. 3% increase for health insurance. We do that in half because it goes over the calendar year, though the calendar year increase is 6% for proposal. So then there are other increased areas that are listed there through curriculum instruction, athletics, youth apprenticeship, increase in licensure expenses, and then dual credit, rising Phoenix are the more outstanding expense increases for the year. Special revenues, this is all fundraising accounts go through special revenues. So that's really, we present that as a part of the budget, but it is not a point that is focused on as it's not officially a part of the levy. And then Fund 27, special education. This is important to note that just as a reminder that we have to balance the needs of special education through the general fund. And so we do a transfer every year. And that transfer is up to 11.1 million this year. The actual ended up being 8.9 million last year, and a lot of that with increased services, salaries and benefits account for the increase. So the funding for special ed this year is to be at 33.3%. It is some certain, not some sufficient. And what that means is that the state has one pool that it designates for its special education reimbursement. And so they take all the expenses, and if there are more than what they have in that pool, then they have to prorate the reimbursement. So they're estimating that it'll be at 32.4% this year. But in the future budgets, they're looking at making it some sufficient and increasing it to 60%, which would mean it'd be true to expenses. So they're proposing that, but that's not for certain. So some certain is good.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and that would be, and to bring that into perspective, that would be roughly around $3 million more that we would have in our general operating budget, which would be critical. So that would be huge. Fund 38 and 39, we have no Fund 38 and 39 debt right now. Fund 46, so we have, this is our long-term capital improvements fund. So one note that I need to make with this is when we report on all funds, which we'll see towards the end of the presentation, it looks like we have a huge deficit, okay? And we have a small deficit on Fund 10, but what we have to think about is some of these funds, like Fund 46, operates on very small revenues and operates primarily out of its fund balance from prior years. So right now you have a $3.7 million expenditure that's gonna increase that offset of the fund balance use for all funds. But it's not really reflective of our general operations. So compared to other versions of the budget that have gone before the Finance and Facilities Committee, it was $460,000 for revenues for Fund 46, and we revised that to just $60,000 just to reflect interest in. We did that in our efforts to reduce the Fund 10 operating budget. We did that this year just because of that need, and the reason we were doing the transfer was to set aside for technology infrastructure, which is very critical. So that was something that we're doing just this year. Fund 50 food service, this shows revenues and expenditures for that. We're continuing with CEP. I put some information down below about our ISP, so our increased percentage reimbursement for free rates for meals has increased, which is huge. So we will, if you take 100% of the meals, we'll get the free rate reimbursement for almost 70%. So that is, it's up slightly, just 1% for this next year. And so I will not go through all of these, but just, we had reduced administrative fees with our food service contract. We do need to look at participation. We did also, with the leasing program the district has moved to for its maintenance vehicles, general ed, and food service, that did add an expenditure to the food service fund. But instead of that food service fund absorbing a large expenditure once every 5-6 years when they replace trucks, it's all at once, or it's spread out and smoothed out over time, which is a benefit too. So this is what I referenced before. If you look at your Fund 10 general expenditure, or your Fund 10 revenue and expense budgets, we have the information there for that. And then when you look at the all funds, it looks like 4.5 million is going into fund balance, but that includes your offset for food service, for even what we have in Fund 21 and Fund 46. So just to keep that in mind. These are just pie charts that show our state and property tax local sources of revenue, our largest sources of revenue. That always is the case. Our federal sources have gone down quite a bit because ESSER funds are complete. So that's a big thing to think about now. And you know, one thing to always keep in mind in the grand scheme of things is through ESSER, we haven't been supported with inflationary increases to the per pupil revenue. And those were even paused because we received ESSER funds. So it was almost a double whammy from the standpoint of the revenue stream to really support public education in the state of Wisconsin. Expenditures are here, and your employee benefits and salaries, they're around roughly 76%, which is very, very typical and normal. So we kind of fall right in the groove for that in the grand scheme of our budget. Other factors. So other factors, open enrollment. That is a huge expenditure that has increased. We had like 341 students open enrolled last year. We're up to 398. So we had an increase there this year, which has increased our budget substantially for open enrollment out of our net open enrollment between revenue and expenditure. This just shows what we have kind of as trends for open enrollment in the past years. And some of the last things I wanted to share, voucher school funding. I have to estimate what we're gonna have for vouchers. And we had a 42% increase last year. I put in 14.5% here. It's a best guess, but that's, you know, we don't really have a whole lot of information to go on right now at this point that would say, this is what your estimated voucher amount is. We really get that October 15th. So I'll get that then. This just shows, you know, there is just it's a huge weight on our levy. So $1.28 if my figures turn out to be right, or it's a little low if I'm low, are funded through, funds the private schools through the levy, so that we're required to include that. That's just how that goes. So that's local tax dollars funding private education. This again, I had a bigger chart of this, but this shows that $325 per student is the increase in per pupil public school funding, and all the voucher programs went up $344 this year. Voucher funding amounts, this shows the amounts per school locally. We have one new school, Emmanuel is new in participating in the voucher program this year. Roncalli, 2.9 million, 1.4 for Lutheran High. Can't read my own numbers here. And then for First German, 633,000 and 150,000 for Emmanuel this year. And these are just the amounts on the chart right here. Oops, it looks like I actually have a typo in there for the dollar change. No, that is right. So funding amounts there. Key points looking ahead. So as I mentioned, stimulus funds are gone. We have declining enrollment. And so we're really, as an admin team, we're going to have to look at that. We're going to need to sort of recalibrate and remeasure how things work with matching declining enrollment. We have a critical mass of facility needs. So we have to look at both increasing what we have for our funding for just to keep up with our buildings and grounds, as well as addressing the urgent needs. And yeah, that is, those are the main highlights. So, questions? Yes?
Questions? The food program,
Yes.
would we make more money if we offered breakfast?
Yes. We do offer breakfast. I have to clarify that.
We don't get the same participation that we used to.
Correct. And I'm going to be bringing that information. Hopefully hoping to bring that to the next finance and facilities. I think it's down by only about a fifth compared to when we were in the full throttle of offering breakfast in the classroom. Yeah.
My other question is, if I'm looking at that correctly, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but what would I know all kids are different in special ed. what would our cost per pupil average out to be with special education population, roughly? Reason I'm asking is I'm looking at if you're a voucher school, you get roughly $4,000 more a year per student than we get. So we're paying above and beyond what the public school kid gets in a voucher.
Correct.
And then my question is, how does their special needs voucher compare with what they're getting compared to what we would be reimbursed by the state?
I can look into what that amount is. I mean, it's, yeah.
Yeah, they do. They get
We
scholarships.
have to do our open enrollment projections. It calculates our special ed rate for open enrollment based on a formula based on our general population of students. So it is a higher rate. I'm not exactly sure what that is, and that formula changes every year.
Yep, and that's, I want to believe it's like a little over what we pay out to districts if they have special education, open enrollment in and out. The the regular ed is $8,900. It's 13,000 something this year for that. But I think what you're talking about, Biff, is the special needs voucher compared to that program, the voucher program, correct?
Well, my concern is, again, that we get $11,000, 25 per student.
And they're getting that difference.
And they're, according to this, they get more, and according to just regular high school kids, they're getting quite a bit more. And I guess I'm looking for the reason that happens, why we get less than a school that, and this is not if you're against vouchers or like vouchers. My question is, why would one school get 11,000 and the other school gets 15?
Yeah, let me get that number for you. I have an idea.
I'm just
how
looking
we
for the
can pull it.
justification for that, and I don't know who could answer that.
It is an excellent question.
I think they have a better name, image, and likeness contract. Thank you. Sure you've been playing that game.
So, yeah, no, it's a good question. I think we can easily take and look at our numbers and then look at, how much that
Just
was.
appreciate it. It's not too much trouble, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, any other questions? Yes.
Can you tell me what's the average teacher salary and benefit package for our district?
Oh, gosh, I want to say it's around $64,000, and then an average benefits package, if you take the full health insurance, by the time you get all your payroll benefits, WRS is around roughly 28 to 30,000.
And then can you tell me what's the average yearly salary increase for our teachers and administrators?
Well, for the teachers, the average salary is around 64,000. So then for administrators as well, or
No,
that varies? I'm sorry.
The yearly increase is what I'm.
Oh,
like an
okay, gotcha. Okay, so we did 4.12 on the CPI, but then the teachers also receive an $1,800 step. And then for administrators, it is $2,000 for the step. Our support staff receives steps, hourly amount step, and that ranges between 31 cents, I'm forgetting, and 50 cents. And it depends on the class, and then that's like over the course of the year, they'll receive like a 60 cent or $1 throughout the year.
Okay, good job.
Any other questions?
Of course, you have to compare that to inflation as well. I mean,
Yes.
teachers didn't really make a raise this year.
Top
Teacher is at the
Yes.
top paid teacher is at like 80 right now.
Oh! It depends.
And if you can't, let me know.
Yes, I can't remember the top teacher. 90, yeah.
Starting.
Yeah.
Then some of the leadership
Starting
roles.
is 50 now, or is it still 40?
Ooh, gosh, do you know what the starting one is offhand?
Starting salary, 49,454.
49. Okay, thank you.
What was that, starting salary?
Starting
Yes.
teacher salary.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If you want to leave feedback, scan the code.
Right.
That's all I got.
Thank you both.